In the review for the final exam, if you have a problem like negative 17.64 divided by 2.45, the first thing you will notice is that a negative divided by a positive should be a negative. So I'm going to put that down so I don't forget it. Then I'm going to do the long division. 2.45 goes here. 17.64 here. I can't divide by a decimal, so I need to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So if I do that here, I have to be fair and do that here. So my decimal point is here. And then how many times does 245 go into 1,764? Well, you can look at 2 going into 17, it might be 8, because 8 times 2 is 16, but then because of this, that might be too big, or it might be 7. So that's where you'll do a little trial and error. And I'm going to try 7 first. 5 times 7 is 35. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 3 is 31. 2 times 7 is 14, plus 3 is 17. So that's going to be the number 7. Times 245 is 1715. Then you need to subtract. So borrow. This becomes 14 minus 5 is 9. 5 minus 1 is 4. Then I'm going to add a 0 here and bring it down. So then how many times does 245 go into 490? I'll try 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. And we'll go over here and do 245 times 2. And this is going to be 9, and this is 4. So it works out exactly to 490. Now, if this is not a 0, if this is any other number other than 0, I would have had to add a 0 here and bring it down to whatever this is. But as it is, my answer is negative 7.2. The next problem, 2 3/4 divided by 1 1/3 times 1 3/7. First of all, with mixed numbers, when you're multiplying and dividing, you need to change them into improper fractions. So 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11. So 11/4. And then this would be 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1, that's 4/3. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 3 is 10/7. Now, order of operations, you do multiplication and division in order from left to right. So in this case, we would do the division before the multiplication as we're working from left to right. Since you cannot divide fractions, you're going to have to change the division to multiplication by the reciprocal of 4/3. So this becomes 33/16 times 10/7. And before we multiply and get a really big number, we might want to put it into lowest terms, because what we're going to do is multiply the numerators and then multiply the denominators. So you can think of this as one big fraction, multiplying the numerators, multiplying the denominators. Notice that 10 and 16 have a common factor of 2. So I can divide 10 by 2 and get 5. I can divide 16 by 2 and get 8. That might make our multiplication a little bit easier. And plus we have to put it in lowest terms anyway. So 33 times 5. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 5 is 15 plus 1 is 16. So it's 165 over 8 times 7, which is 56. Now typically, when you have an improper fraction, you're going to need to put it back into mixed number form. So we want to know how many times does 56 go into 165. Now you can look at 5 going into 16 would normally go in 3 times into 16. So let's try to multiply 56 by 3 and see if it works. It might not work because it might be too big. 6 times 3 is 18. And yes, it's going to be too big. So that tells me I'm going to use a 2. And 2 times 56 is 112. Subtract. And so my remainder is 53. So how I'm going to write my answer is 2 whole with 53 over 56 as the fraction. So the remainder over what I am dividing by. Okay, the next problem, write the unit rate of 54.5 ounces for 8 people. So that means just divide. We want to know the number of ounces for one person. So 54.5 divided by 8. 8 goes into 54. 6 times 8 is 48. Subtract, we're going to need to borrow. So this is 14 minus 8 is 6. Put my decimal point here because it's here and bring down the 5. 8 goes into 65 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract, and I'm still not getting a 0, so I'm going to add another 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 10 one time, so that's 8. I'm still not getting a 0, so let's keep going. 8 goes into 20 2 times. This is 4, still not getting a 0, so I'm going to bring down another 0, and 40 divided by 8 is exactly 5, so this stops at 5. Obviously, if you get a decimal that goes on and on forever, you don't want to keep going forever, so you'll need to round at some point, but this one did eventually terminate. So we have this is the number of ounces per one person. So that's how I can label my unit rate, the number of ounces for one person. Each person gets that many ounces. 84 is 70% of what number? It's helpful with these percent problems to translate them from English into math. So 84 is where you put your equal sign. 70%, 70% as a decimal is 0.70. Of means to multiply. What number? That's what I don't know. That's what I use my variable for. So if I'm missing the number here when I'm multiplying, I'm going to divide to find that missing number. Now notice I didn't put 0.70 because 0.7 is the same as 0.70 and it will be easier to use 0.7. So I need to divide 84 by 0.7. And I can't divide by a decimal, so I need to move the decimal point one place to the right. Moving the decimal point one place to the right means I need to put a 0 here. And then 8 and 7. 7 goes into 8 one time. Bring down the 4. 7 goes into 14 twice. 2 times 7 is 14. And I do get a remainder of 0, but I can't stop yet because, see, my decimal point is here, and I've got this 0. So 7 goes into 0 times. So 84 is 70% of 120. So that makes sense because my answer has to be bigger than 84. If I'm taking a portion of a number that's bigger, then I get a number that's smaller. Okay, 42 is what percent of 120? So 42 is what percent of 120? So what I'm going to need to do to find the percent is to divide by 120. And a percent comes from a decimal, and a decimal comes from a fraction. So here's my fraction that I'm setting up, but now I need to turn it into a decimal. and then turn it into a percent from there. So I'm going to divide by 120, put the decimal point in. Now 120 does not go into 42, so I'm going to have to add a 0. 120 goes into 420 3 times. 3 times 120 is 360. Subtract, and that's going to be 60. So the next step, I'm going to have to add a 0 here and bring it down. 120 goes into 600 5 times exactly. So that works out to be 0. So my decimal stops, and 0.35, I need to convert it to a percent, so you move the decimal 2 places to the right, and you get 35%. So 42 is 35% of what 120. And that makes sense because 120 is a big number. If you only take 35% of it, that's not even taking half of it, and so, this is less than half.